every craft has their tool for the thing that they do with their work. Why don't we have that? And so that was sort of the further insight of like, okay, no one's building this. I don't know how it's going to get built if I don't try. So I divested from the restaurants, and the rest is history.
Hello and welcome to the Pre-Shift Podcast, this show featuring real restaurant people, real stories, and real advice to build high-performing teams. I'm DJ Costantino, and I'll be your host. Josh Sharkey joins us in the virtual studio today.
Hi, my name is Josh Sharkey. I'm the founder and CEO of meez, a recipe tool and culinary operating system for every single kitchen worldwide.
The founder and CEO of meez, Josh Sharkey, is an entrepreneur, chef, and restaurant operator with over 20 years of experience in this industry. After more than a decade of cooking in Michelin-starred restaurants, he opened Bark Hot Dogs in 2009, which earned numerous accolades in the fast casual space. Sharkey spent 5 years as the COO of RFI Brands before launching meez to the public late 2020, following over 2 years of development. meez is an all-in-one recipe tool for culinary professionals. Think Google Docs for chefs. It centralizes the development process, makes menus easier to execute, and offers a universally accessible and editable recipe format. Sharkey is also a fellow podcaster and has hosted the meez podcast since early 2023. In this episode, Josh dives into the origins of meez, shares the challenges he faced transitioning from chef to tech founder, and explains how his platform is helping teams scale their business, maintain consistency, and optimize their bottom line. Whether you're running a small kitchen or multi-unit group, Josh's insights into recipe tech, team training, and operational efficiency are invaluable. So without further ado, here's our conversation. Can you share a bit about your background in restaurants and that journey up into the creation of meez? Was there a particular moment you remember where you're like, I got to do this? The idea came, or did it kind of come over time and, develop that way?
Sure. I've chatted about this a number of times, but I'm happy to sort of reiterate it again. And I'll start with the novel idea I had, which was over 2 decades ago, because the original idea for meez was something very, very simple. I was working at this restaurant called Tabla in New York City, and in the mornings I would make charcuterie for free for Chef Mark Vitale had a Cella Maria in Union Square, and I, like many chefs, or every chef, had a little black book of all my recipes and ideas and just every sort of thought I had about food. And this one in particular had a lot of detail on how to make all these different types of salumi, prosciutto, pancetta, guanciale, everything. And on my day off, one day I was staging at another restaurant called Veritas, and I lost the friggin' notebook. And so the novel idea, like 20 some odd years ago, was I'm going to digitize recipes because, back then Evernote didn't exist, Google Sheets didn't exist. It was a very, novel but simple idea back then. And of course, like over time, I started working in more kitchens, and then running kitchens, and then owning my own business and owning multiple restaurants. And I was like, wow, there's a lot more that we need here. And I was looking for a tool to do all the things that we do in the kitchen, with a recipe, collaboration and training and scaling batch sizes and converting units of measure, and of course getting cost, but just all the things that we do, R&D, things like that with these recipes. And the only thing I could find when I searched like recipe software was like inventory platforms. And I mean, you need those as well, but like, that's not a recipe tool. It's sort of like designing, if Tesla designed their car parts in QuickBooks, they're just very different things. And I was just very frustrated that our sort of work, our craft, was sort of relegated to these kind of finance tools as sort of a small, tiny piece of a finance tool, as opposed to starting with like, hey, wait a second, there's a craft. We have, designers have Figma, and architects have AutoCAD, and engineers have GitHub, and every craft has their tool for the thing that they do with their work. Why don't we have that? And so that was sort of the further insight of like, okay, no one's building this. I don't know how it's going to get built if I don't try. So I divested from the restaurants, and the rest is sort of history.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember my dad's a chef and educator, and he's been in the business a while, and he had these I remember watching him use these recipe tools on his old Gateway computer, these Windows 95 looking things, and it just didn't seem like it was the best way to do things.
Well, I think that people, and look, it's I understand it because a part of this is true is that software looks at recipes as an invoice of ingredients so that you can get a cost of the recipe. And that's one tiny percentage of the things that a recipe is. A recipe is your IP, it's your ideas, it's your brand, it's how you operate. Um, and that's the core of what a recipe is. One of the things, the outputs of that happens to be a cost, among other things. But I think that it's just sort of like inverting the way that we think about the problem.
So how'd you go from, you had the idea, you decided to do it. How'd you go from the idea to building it and building the company? Because, as a chef and going into software, what was that transition like?
Painful, long, and a lot of screw ups and learning. I mean, I remember the first, we rebuilt it twice before we ever have what you see today as me's. The first time I did it myself, I just looked for an engineer and just started telling them the things that I wanted, and it was very slow to build. And I was like, "What is going on here?" And then I found a team of engineers, like a software team, and I had them start to build it. And then finally, I hired Mary Lee, who's our CTO, and she scrapped everything basically and rebuilt it again. And then from there, we were kind of like, off to the races. But it was a huge learning curve of the process of building software. It was also really fun. I think that I got really lucky in that we found an insight very early on before we ever launched um, that we needed to sort of build in all of the data so that kitchens, chefs, operators didn't have to come up with or figure out any of this sort of like ingredient data that you would actually need to use your recipes, like yields of everything that when you fabricate an ingredient or conversions. And we were doing that. Every single kitchen sort of like did that themselves. So everybody was sort of like reinventing the wheel in all of their spreadsheets. So I think I was really lucky that we sort of did enough diligence before we launched that we learned that. And so we spent, a few years testing and building this database of ingredients within the restaurants that I was running while I was building these.
So you kind of use the restaurants as that system as almost like a glossary or dictionary for ingredients and to have that consistency across all platforms. So if I type chives with a capital C or you type it with a lowercase c, it stays consistent. It doesn't get all kind of mucked up.
That's a whole other, and that was a whole other piece of this. So there's just the actual conversion and yield data, because at the time the only thing that we had was this thing called the Book of Yields, which was very limiting and also oftentimes inaccurate. And then you'd have to search for things online, and there's some decent resources for things, for certain types of things. But because we had enough kitchens, we had hundreds of kitchens with this restaurant group I was running, and enough time, we were able to test, for example, like hundreds of pounds of garlic, many times over many kitchens to get an average of like what happens when you peel the garlic, how much do you lose? If you have a clove of garlic on average, how much does it weigh? If you mince it on a microplane, how much does that weigh? Um, so so that was sort of just kind of serendipitous that we were able to have the time to do that. On top of that, yeah, then a big part of what Meez does is help you get your recipes into the platform really quickly, because I find it's pointless if you can't do that. And that was the biggest problem that we had to solve. So the other piece of this was this language model we had to build of when you write a recipe, it's kind of the Wild West. There's no like standard
Yeah.
format of how you write a recipe. Sometimes the quantities first, sometimes the units, sometimes the ingredient, sometimes it's just all over the place, and your instructions are here, and so we had to be able to like parse all those things and know that that's an ingredient, that's a quantity, that's an action, that's a unit. And so that meant just like running thousands and thousands and thousands of exercises of different types of recipes through this model, and then all the iterations of how you spell or misspell chive, or how you spell or misspell gram, or is it GRM or GRAM or GM or GRRM when you misspell it, or all the different languages of it, so that and we constantly update that. But every time somebody misspells something, the system gets smarter.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Book of Yields from my recipe editing days, and that book is a pain in the butt. I'd show it to you, but I definitely threw it away or gave it away somewhere. But Was there a particular like ingredient or type of food or anything in recipes that gave you guys a lot of trouble that was like really difficult to get into a to get consistent?
Um, there always is, and it continues to be. Oftentimes, as chefs or bakers, we use percentages for things like sausage or a duck liver mousse or bread, and there's different types of percentages. So you have a baker's percent. There's a base. Let's just say they have 1,000 grams of flour, and then that recipe has 67% hydration. So you have 670 grams of water, which itself is simple, but there's lots of different ways that you have variants of that. So that was tough. And then unit of measures was a big one of all the different ways in which people create their own units of measure, and how do we accommodate that. No, I mean the list goes on. Honestly, like when you have like variants of how much you want to use, 1 to 2 tablespoons, or if it's not exactly a tablespoon, what do you do? There's a lot of logic around like how we display units of
Pinch,
measure.
dash,
If it's like one and a
that
quarter,
too.
yeah, exactly. When does it go down to a pinch? And then do you want to show like multiple? Is it 2 tablespoons plus a teaspoon? When do you not do that? So there's a lot of logic there. And by the way, in the beginning, a lot of angry chefs, which understandably, because we just sort of picked ways to show things because you have to. That's one of the things with code is you have to tell the computer what you want it to do, and that's a decision, right? So I remember at one point we had recipes scaling, and at a certain point, they, like cups would turn to quarts, and then at a certain point, quarts would turn to gallons. If you scale it up large enough, a lot of chefs wanted things to always stay in quarts because oftentimes we'll use like Cambros and things. So
All
I'm
good.
getting in the weeds here, but there's lots of things like this that we're always kind
Yeah,
of
I'm just
pointing out.
curious. Like, there's so many intricacies and so many styles, and it's interesting to hear how you're able to distill that and be able to present it to people in a way because I think part of the reason people keep doing things on paper or in their notebooks is just because they can do it in their own personal way, right? Um, so it seems a challenging gap to bridge for sure, but you guys are putting in the work and figuring it out.
Yeah, it's unbelievably challenging because it is so personal, and I think it's probably why people don't do this is because, and we see it every day where the recipes are so personal, and the way that you write them is so personal, and the way that you want your team to view them is so personal, and so we have to constantly figure out how do we accommodate and be more flexible and more dynamic in the way in which we let you write the recipe, so it feels like you're writing into a Word doc, but the output feels like actual software, um, and that's really the key, to be honest with you, because I think that what most folks may not consider when you're running a food business is there's three pieces of data that everyone needs, right? There's purchase data, there's sales mix data, and there's recipe data. And pretty much every software on the backup house has solved for purchase data and sales mix data, right? Like pulling in your menu sales from a POS system, and then pulling in your purchases from your vendor or from scans or EDI, however you do that. And there's still challenges there that you have to solve for, right? How do you normalize the purchase units to the recipe units, things like that. But if you only have those two things, you don't really have a clear picture of what your benchmark food cost should be. And the majority of people operating restaurants, if you don't have that benchmark, if you don't have the recipe data tied to the menu sales, then you don't really know like what you should have as a food cost. You can see what you actually have as a food cost for the most part. It might be a little bit skewed if you don't have the recipe data as well. But if you don't have the recipe data, it's very hard to understand. Like, I should be at a 20% food cost because that's really important. If you're actually at a 24% food cost, and maybe 24% sounds really really good. But if you knew that you should be at a 20% and there's a 4% delta, you know, for every $1,000,000 you're doing, that's $40,000 you're losing, and it adds up quick.
And when you say recipe data, do you mean, what's being used to actually cook the food that's going out versus the inventory and what you're purchasing from your vendors? Is that kind of how it is? Does that make
Yeah, what I mean is when we say recipe data, and by the way, I hate using the word recipe data, but because recipe is a lot more than just data. But when you write a recipe, right? If you write a recipe into a like a typical sort of system, you have to write, for example, you know, like a 2 pounds of carrots, and then you have to write as and that can be a sub recipe, right? And for like the amount of a sliced carrot, right? So you write a recipe for sliced carrots, and then you have to say how much do you yield from 2 pounds, and you have to do that for every single way that you fabricate that ingredient, and you have to write it exactly the way that the unit works in that system, right? So your recipe probably doesn't say 2 pounds of carrots sliced. It probably says half a cup of sliced carrots or something like that. So when you write recipes, the way that you use them in the kitchen, you have to make sure that can translate to how you would actually quantify that in terms of total usage in a in the inventory. So we have to like sort of bridge the gap there, right? So if we want to make sure that if you write half a cup of sliced carrots, that we know, like about how much half a cup of sliced carrots weighs from weight to volume, and that how much you lose if that's 72% that you lose, so that we can, quantify like the total amount of carrot that you used. The recipe data is that total sort of like output of like what's everything that you've used from all of these recipes and sub recipes within a menu item, that gives you your actual the real true cost of that thing. And the only way to get that is if you have like the accurate recipe and exactly how you make it in the kitchen, and then convert that to the cost.
That's so interesting. One of like the recent interesting things that like blew my mind, shout out my dad again, was like explaining with loss. If you put anything in a blender and blend it, you have to account like a certain percentage of loss because you just can't get everything out. Like it's impossible to get everything back out of the blender, right? Without cutting up your hand. So it's like that kind of stuff all gets accounted for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really most things have some element of loss to them, even if it's small, but it adds up. You use a tomato, you're going to quart, and sometimes you might take the skin off as well and concassate it, and that there's loss there, right? If you use an eggplant, either you're going to peel it, or you're going to char it over an open fire, and you're going to lose. You have loss from the water weight. Everything has loss to it, and it has to be accounted for. And it's typically a lot more loss than you probably think.
I mean, obviously this is the problem you're trying to solve, right? In part. What percentage, if you will, of restaurants are kind of flying a little bit blind with this kind of stuff?
Mhm. I you know, I if I gave you an answer, it would be some sort of like
Sure.
guess that I'm not. I don't know. I mean, we see a lot of them, and I think they most folks will admit, yeah, it's I think for the longest time it's been sort of this back of the napkin thing, and that's been okay, and maybe it was okay because margins weren't so tight. Now they're so tight that like you have to know. But what I would say is you'd be surprised that even really really large restaurant groups um, have blind spots in terms of like understanding their true like theoretical cost.
I'm curious how in solving problems like that, what's been the kind of reception been from chefs in the culinary community, and do you have any like success stories that are to come out top of mind? You could think of people using the tool and making changes in their business.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as a chef, and that's what I was most of my life was as a chef in kitchens, and just seeing chefs react, even just the reaction to it when we see them playing with the product or getting a demo, and the messages they send of, man, I wish I had this 20 years ago, and this is we can totally tell that this was built by other chefs, and that reaction, to be honest with you, is what I love most. There's a lot of quantifiable things that we do and they share, saving a ton of time with documentation and with training and with food costing and finding huge profit optimization opportunities and things like all of that's for sure there. But the thing that I love the most, that we hear the most often, is just chefs saying, wow, hell yeah, we finally have a tool that we can use, that's made for us.
So it seems to me like there's kind of two prongs to the product. And course, correct me if I'm wrong. There's the kind of like organizational workflow training and just having your recipes in a neat, tidy place, and then there's the data portion of things and having the recipe costing and integrating that with your all your other data to make sure that you're not keep your food costs in check and make sure your inventory and all of that is correct, and optimizing that. Is that kind of the
Yeah, so you're pretty spot on. There's the way that we look at it is, first of all, Meez is free for everyone, to use. You can put all your recipes in there for life, unlimited recipes, put it in your videos, put in, and that's what we want everyone to do. We have lots of culinary schools using this. And from the value prop of like a way to organize all of your content, that is something that everybody gets for free, and it doesn't matter like what else you're doing with the product. That's sort of like the first thing we want to do is give you a way better way to organize all your content by station, by tool, by concept, by who made it, by a recipe book, by season, any way you want to organize things, as well as all the functionality that we need for recipes to produce them every day. And so this is all this stuff is the free stuff, right? So scaling dynamically, converting units of measure, the way that you can sort of share recipes and view sort of slideshows. This is all free. So organizing and in creating and like prepping your recipes is the free product. And then when you start to explore the other parts of the product that are the sort of upper level tiers, there's really two things that people look for. One is they want to maintain consistency at scale, and two is they want to increase their profit margin. That's what Meez does for you at scale. And when I say at scale, what I mean is the ability for you to run your business without you having to be there every day and it being consistently the way that you envision it to run. So that could be one restaurant, and that could be 400 restaurants. But there's really these two primary cases. We want to maintain consistency across all of our locations, across all of our team members, across all of our day parts, so that every single menu item is the same, because that's the most important thing for a restaurant in terms of retention and growth. And then the other part of the product is obviously, how do you increase profit margin? So yes, first you have to very clearly understand what is your profit margin, what is the cost of all these things. And so that's the biggest problem to solve, that I think Meez is solving better than anyone, is like truly understanding the profit margin of your menu, and then giving you the tools to actually have an impact on increasing that profit margin. There's other things now that we've rolled out new products this year, in terms of data, so that you can push this recipe data to other places and do lots of fun things, with your recipe data, and then some more sort of transactional things that folks need, like inventory counting and things like that.
So kind of just making sure, I'm listening to you talk about kind of these things and thinking about similar stuff we're doing at Seven Shifts, just, on the scheduling side of things and that consistency and making things run while you're not there. And, it's a good pairing. But I'm curious, we like to talk a lot about team management on our show and running teams. And how do you think, kind of, I guess, where would Meez help in terms of something like back of house retention or back of house staff engagement? Keeping your kitchen team happy, your bars team happy, and have given them the tools they need to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that has to be inherent in really any product that you, or any tool that you give your team. Is one of the measures of success should be that the team feels more empowered and more set up for success. It's something I learned very early on from, actually from the founders of Blue Ribbon Restaurant Group. Eric told me many, many years ago, the most important thing, for a great team is you have to set them up for success. If you give them sort of goals or tasks that are just unattainable because you haven't given tools, the resources, then they won't be set up for success. And that's the fastest way, to see unhappy team members. And we get, feedback all the time from companies where their teams are, just super stoked to finally have a tool to use. And really that's the most important part of the bedrock of why we built this tool, is so that you can actually use it every day. And that is the best marker of knowing that a team is happy with the tools, that they're using it every single day and that they're asking for more. So it really is everything. I have this sort of heuristic that I think about, because I've had to buy a lot of software for restaurants. And, the question like you always have to ask is, will this be a tool that will require my team in order to be successful? Or will this be something that my team will require to be successful? Does the tool rely on the team, or does the team rely on the tool? And that's the most important part of anything you're going to give to folks, because if they have to do all this work and it's a chore for them, then they're not going to be super happy. And that's really important, especially in the kitchen. It's hard, it's fast paced. Obviously, there's a lot to do, and you have to set clear expectations, and and be really explicit with what you expect. And that's a big part of the product, is making sure that every recipe is crystal clear. We give you, the opportunity to make sure you can add pictures and images and update things in real time. Pictures and videos to every step. And because, by the way, like, I also really, I hate the wrong word, but I really disagree with the idea of sending a long video to somebody with how to do something, because a restaurant is sort of every day in real time. And just in case information is way better than or is way worse than just in time, and so people have a hard time sort of absorbing 30 minutes of a video. But if you give them a video of, like, here's precisely how I want you to slice that shallot, here's exactly how the color of this sauce should look when it's reduced, those things are very, very helpful, and you can go right to that part of the recipe and see it. Um, and a recipe is a proxy, I guess, for anything that you're training. But you need to give folks the tools and the clarity to be successful.
Absolutely. And then that use case just in the kitchen, people can, your team can look recipes up on their phone or laptop or iPad, or print them out and just have that in the way that they need it. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
KDS screens, tablets,
Absolutely.
phones, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make, just about enabling your team and making sure that they don't have to put in all this work to get the they're not having to put in a ton of work into the platform just to get something out of it. It seems like you've really focused on making an easy user experience and enabling it to help people, rather than giving them, like you said, more work to do, just inputting data.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's and especially in a restaurant, critical tools are what matter most. Um, and again, it's like, does the tool rely on the team, or does the team rely on the tool? And I think that's a great heuristic for anybody to think about when they're exploring software or building it.
Curious, going from being in the food business and running restaurants and restaurant groups, um, what's similar about that and running a restaurant software company, and what's been the biggest kind of challenge you've had to overcome in making that transition for yourself as a leader?
Okay, well, I would say I screwed up a lot, in terms of some of the ways in which I thought about running restaurants. And the common thread between running a restaurant and a tech company, which is really running any business, is people and the importance of people. Um, and it took me longer than I would like to admit to understand that. Um, Other than that, I actually find that cooking is far more similar um, to tech and running a tech company than than running a restaurant, because cooking is a constant process of iteration and tweaking, and creating the right systems, and and it's obviously building product, and there's a lot of similarities I see there. But a restaurant, just like any other business, a tech company included, is all about, like, people. People are your business. The people that work with you, and the people that you serve. And I think that's really the common thread with any business.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Something one of my guests spoke about was like the difference between running a restaurant, getting food out there, managing that team, and then actually operating the business side of things. It's like two completely different things. It's not like one and the same. It's two very different tasks, and that require very different disciplines or very different mindsets. And it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about how it's more similar to cooking than it is to actually running a restaurant business.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think that there's more similarities with running, like, a highly scaled, for example, like, fast casual restaurant, and running the tech company, than maybe a high end restaurant, like a Michelin star spot. I come more from the Michelin star world, and the thing that it took a long time for me to get over is, when you're cooking, you can tweak a recipe, tweak a menu item, and put it out that day. You get right away, you can change something, and you can also get instant gratification, and you can continue to do that every single day. You could do it multiple times in a day, and see the impact. With
Yeah.
tech, you cannot do that. Now, there are some, there you can deploy every single day, but typically, like, things take a lot more time. And especially if you have a product that a company relies on for accuracy of data, and there's complexities there, and there's sort of downstream, effects of the data not being accurate, and or speed, or like, responsiveness. QA is a big, is really important, and making sure that you build, the right thing and solve the right problem. And, idea to execution to rollout is way slower in tech than in the type of cooking that I'm used to. And I think that was like the biggest thing for me to get over, which my CTO bared the brunt of having to
Yeah.
deal with for quite a while. And I think now, we are much closer
Very nice. Yeah,
because
you're like,
of
oh,
what I've
why
learned.
you can't just tweak that and deploy it right now? And it's like, no,
Yeah, like, this seems so
you
simple. Like,
cannot.
let's get it out next week, and that
Yeah,
does
it's
not
not
happen.
changing a one green vegetable for another. It's very different. Yeah, I mean, one of my other questions was like those leadership lessons, but it seems like that's been one of the big ones. So through all the changes and oh, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Recently, I have sort of crystallized something that I've been thinking about for quite a while in terms of leadership, that has been I wouldn't call it a wholesale change, but something that just seems so much more clear, and that we're now sort of operationalizing into the business. It's funny because I was just talking about this yesterday with Alice Chang from Culinary Agents. She was on the show, and I'm not a big fan of job descriptions where there's like a list of duties, and I find that giving someone a list of duties, while helpful and can sort of help to sort of give you a sense of expectations of here's the kinds of things you should expect to do, it can create a culture of task orientation as opposed to result orientation, like being task driven instead of results driven. And I think one thing that I've gotten a lot more clarity on recently, especially given the the principle in our company, that we want everyone to be autonomous and sort of being able to sort of run their own world, and that goes into everything that they do in their in their position, and just being sort of just looking at the KPI that means success for them, and otherwise do things however you like, as long as you're following our values. Um, but what I've crystallized is that the most important thing for any leader when working with any team member is being crystal clear with, like, here's the result that we expect. Here's the rules of engagement of how we want to behave and work together. And here's our core values and our first principles. Everything else should be up to them. The how, the when, things like that. Because I think the more that you restrict the way in which something can happen, the more you limit the possibilities for innovation, the more you limit someone's ownership of something. And I'm trying more and more to be less specific about how we want things to be done, and almost overtly telling them, hey, it does not need to be done this way. This is how it has been done. But what is most important is this KPI. And as long as you have that KPI and you're following our core values and principles, then do your thing. And I think that's critical if you're going to scale an organization.
Do you think that's how you've kept? Because my other question was like, how do you maintain that vision and kind of stay motivated and not lose yourself when faced with challenges and go in a different direction? Is it just that like kind of crystal clear laser focus on what you want to do and allowing for lack of a better word smart people to do the right thing?
Well, I think the most important thing up front is actually just making sure that you have a vision and it's clear, because I think oftentimes that can be a little bit cloudy, and and if you don't know what it is, and um, and the team doesn't know what it is, and it's not like crystal clear, then it's very hard to maintain it, right? So number one is just making sure you're very clear, like, why did I start this thing? And typically, what ends up happening with that why is something that's a little bit too surface level. I'm a chef. I love this thing. I love this tool. I wanted to build a really awesome tool, but it took some more digging to understand, like, okay, but why do I want to build this? And what I came to was, oh well, I want to create the universal recipe medium. I want a place where every single professional chef and any mixologist, any kitchen, any operator, like this is the place where you put all your recipes. You might do other things in other places, finance wise or operations wise, but all your recipes will live here. And for a while, to be honest with you, that was actually like my sort of North Star and the team's North Star. But I'm always trying to like reassess and question things. And I did that, about a year ago. And it's like, well, wait a second, why do I want a universal recipe medium? Because we've scaled now. Now we have thousands and thousands of people using this tool. Okay, well, we can keep doing that. We will. But why do I want to have this universal recipe medium? And what I realized was, you know, I have so many friends that are so talented and smart and work their asses off. And I hope I
Of
can
course.
cuss on here. Sorry.
It is a restaurant podcast, after all.
But yeah. So, you know, like talented, smart people that like work their asses off. And there are times when their restaurant still doesn't make it. And what I realized was like what I'm really trying to do is to make sure that every single person can scale their vision and be both creative and profitable. And I think that is just taken for granted, right? You see tons of like really amazing restaurants, and then 5 years later they close, or 7 years later they close, and or 2 years later they close. And it's a shame, right? Because they shouldn't, and they're doing really incredible things, and they're working their tails off. So for me, like the reason why we exist is to bridge creativity and profitability, and just help everybody scale their vision. And I say scale your vision, like really, like it's really important, that word. And this is also why we're able to maintain sort of what we do over time, and be able to say no to things, is because we think a lot about the word scale, for many reasons. And oftentimes you think of scale as like I'm gonna roll this out to I'm gonna go from one location to 5 to 10 to 100, and that is scale. But I know a lot of chefs, my age now, and I'm in my 40s, and if you're still working the line, first of all, it can be a lot of fun, right? And a lot of folks still want to do that, and that's great. But it's also nice to be able to say, hey, you know what, tonight I'm not going to. I'm going to go home with my wife or my kids, or for the holiday, and that's also scale. The ability to be able to step away and know that things are still operating the way that you want them to, even if you have one location. So that is like such a huge motivation for myself and my whole team, because we are most of the team is actually expats of the kitchen. And so we're always sort of motivated to make sure we keep building this thing so that everyone can scale their vision. And that's allowed us to make hard decisions, right? So it took us 3 years to start building sort of back office tech, and all we did was focus on recipe technology, even though everyone was asking us to build inventory and all these things. And we just, we stuck to our guns for a long time. And I think that's really important, is just making sure you're really clear on the vision that everybody is, and that it's something that is, compelling enough and that can touch people enough that they actually care. Because a lot of times visions can be great and grand and huge and really, world changing, but they have to also connect with the people that you're building this thing with.
Yeah, I mean, that was great and a lot of awesome stuff in there. As we kind of come at our time, what are you most excited about building wise? And, um, you know, what are you building now that you're excited about, or anything you just kind of released this year on the product, or anything you're doing that you're really just pumped about at the company?
Yeah, well, what I'm most pumped about is just seeing how the team has grown personally. Each individual person on the team. If you just look at all of them a year ago, even to today, they're all so much better, and everybody has improved so much and become more and more autonomous and better at what they do. And I'm just excited because I see how that is going to keep continuing to improve. So the team is for sure what I'm most excited about right now. We launched a few products this year that were a bit of a game changer for us in terms of how we've been able to grow and service our customers. Um, so we're going to continue to double down on those products. A really sort of innovative way to count inventory that is dynamic, because I was always annoyed with, how restrictive it was. And, the menu engineering technology to help you improve the profit of your menu, and a lot on the data side, to help you send this recipe data to other places. So a lot to be excited about, but overall, like I said, the team is just, I mean, I get jazzed every day when I just look, and when we have an all hands, I'm like, oh my God, this team is incredible.
Thanks again for checking out this episode of The Pre-Shift. If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review and rating and share it with one of your friends to help the show grow. Also, be sure to subscribe to our Food Runner newsletter. Once a month, you get a roundup of resources, practical tips, and industry leader insights to learn more quickly. Sign up at 7shifts.com/foodrunner. Check the link in the description. Until next time.